Welcome. Ukki, Nitaniku, Enkki. Hello, my name is Grant Manyheads. My Blackfoot name means singer. And I'm one of the interpreters here at Blackfoot Crossing Historical Park. And today we're going to be talking about Blackfoot history. And we're going to be starting from the date we'll be starting from the date 1865. But first, like on the image that you see on the screen, this is the traditional territory of the Blackfoot speaking peoples. So just kind of like a synopsis from the Rocky Mountains all the way out to the Qu'Appelle Valley and Touchwood Hills in Saskatchewan, and from the North Saskatchewan River to the Yellowstone River in present-day Montana, USA. These are the lands in between that the Blackfoot considered their traditional territory. So we believe that this land was given to us by Apostatoki, by the Creator, as a gift for our people. And at one time, this land was filled with buffalo, or bison, or in our language, we say Ini. So Iniksi were all over these lands, and wherever Iniksi went, we followed. So basically, the buffalo defined our territory as Blackfoot-speaking peoples. So if we look at the next image, you see kind of a hand-drawn map of the same area. But on this map, you could see places that kind of relate to what we're going to be talking to today. We have Rocky Mountain House, you can see on the far side there, and Edmonton, Fort Edmonton. Well, these two forts were where the Blackfoot traded the most in the British possessions, are basically up where the Hudson Bay Company had their forts. And down in the United States of America, we traded on the Missouri River at Fort Benton around this time. So you can kind of see where the tribes were spread out in those days. You can see the Siksikaitsitapiiks were between the North and South Saskatchewan River, mostly in Saskatchewan. And then the Gainawa, or Gaina, they were sort of in the middle area there. And then towards the mountains and the foothills, we have the Piikani. So this kind of gives you an idea of where our tribes were placed in the 1800s, particularly between 1830 and 1870. So if we move on to the next image, we'll see 1865. So before we actually get into 1865, I have to give you a little bit of a synopsis as to what sort of events happened within the last few years for the Siksika people. Now, in 1859, one of our head chiefs, Big Old Swan, he passed away. He was friendly with the traders and with the mixed bloods. And in 1860, the older chief Old Son, who was also on good terms with the traders and with the mixed bloods and with the white people, the Hudson Bay Company, he passed away. So that was a big blow to our nation even at that time. Now we come to 1865. Well, what happened in 1865? Well, a couple of things actually happened in 1865. And today we're going to talk about the Blackfoot events that happened in those years. And where we can, we're also going to talk about what Canada, or what the new Canada was doing at that same time of year. So in the summer of 1865, the Blackfoot attacked the outpost of Fort Pitt, which was on the North Saskatchewan River in Saskatchewan, and they were bent more on mischief than warfare. So these Blackfoot, they climbed the walls of the fort, and they stole what wasn't kept behind locked doors and destroyed whatever they could, including 13 carts belonging to fort employees. It was fortunate that no one died in this attack, but it did prove to the Hudson Bay Company that they had a big worry on their hands, especially when it came to the Blackfoot tribes. Well, that was bad news enough, because this was built up over 5 or 6 years, from 1880 up until 1865, this bad feeling, especially after these chiefs died. Then the new chiefs that took their place were actually not as friendly. Old Swan, peaceful Chief Old Swan, who passed away, was replaced by a warlike Big Swan. And the older Old Son, who was peaceful, was replaced by his son, also named Old Son, who was a warlike and was enemy with the Mixed Bloods and with the Cree and with the white people up in the North Saskatchewan, Hudson Bay Company, Rocky Mountain House, and Fort Edmonton. So it was kind of a bad time for the Blackfoot at this time. So in the winter of 1865, well actually not in 1865, what ends up happening in 1865, at the end of the summer of 1865, the head chief Three Sons, who was actually Crowfoot's chief at that time, who was from the Biters band, well, head chief Three Sons dies. So he was the last of the peaceful chiefs. So he's succeeded by his son, who's also named Three Sons. Well, this younger Three Sons, half the band chose him as their chief, and he continued on with a Biters band, but the other half of the band chose Crowfoot as their leader, their chief, and they became known as the Big Pipes Band. So this all happens in 1865. So in the winter of 1865, Three Sons Biters Band is attacked by a huge Cree war party, and at this time they're camped on the Battle River at a place called the Three Pens. So while they're camped there, Three Sons' camp is upstream, and they're attacked by this huge Cree war party. Well, it just so happens at the same time Father Lacombe is visiting Three Sons' camp when this attack happens. So overnight, both Three Sons and Father Lacombe are wounded in this battle. So, but by morning, Crowfoot's camp hears the sounds of battle coming upstream, and so Crowfoot organizes a bunch of Blackfoot warriors, approximately 80 to 100 warriors, all mounted, and then they come to the rescue of Three Sons' camp. So these Blackfoot warriors that are led by Crowfoot, they strike the enemy so hard and so fast that they had no idea what happened. So they become routed and they start scattering. So they all retreated back to a nearby hill, and then they withdrew. So that particular action brought a lot of honor to Crowfoot that morning, because he saved a lot of his fellow Siksikaitsitups from would have been possible death. They could have been wiped out because this Cree war party was actually pretty huge. So this is kind of the state of affairs at that time between the Blackfoot and the Cree. This is where most of the intense fighting happens, is in these years, 1865. So from 1865, here's a picture, an image of Fort Pitt. This is a different story here, but the fort itself is actually rendition of what Fort Pitt looked like at that time when the Blackfoot attacked them. So as you can see here, as I mentioned, the Blackfoot attacked that outpost, and they were bent more on mischief than on warfare, and so they did more destruction and stealing as opposed to actually going after any of the fort employees. But it caused a lot of unrest, and this is what happened in 1865. So now we move on to 1866. Now 1866 was a big year too for the Blackfoot. Now early in March of 1866, a war party of Bloods in North Blackfoot, they discovered what they thought was a small Cree camp at the edge of the Red Ochre Hills. Now to this day, nobody really knows for sure where the Red Ochre Hills were. They give a description. Some people say it was in the South Saskatchewan, or it was just south of the Red Deer River. So we kind of get an idea of where the Red Ochre Hills may have been, but to this day we're not too sure, and it would be great if we really could find this location. Well, anyways, as these Blackfoot scouts, this war party, went into this coulee, they killed 2 women who had been cutting wood there, and were following that snow-filled coulee to the top of a hill when they were discovered. Now on the other side of this hill, there were lodges, and the lodges that they had seen were only a part of a larger camp, and soon the Cree surrounded that coulee, and then the Blackfoot started to run away, retreat, but they had to run through like 3-foot, 4-foot high snow, and so it slowed their progress, and from the top of that hill the Crees just fired into them. And this war party numbered about 150, and they killed about 50 or so of the Blackfoot and Blood that went out there. So this was a big catastrophe to the Blackfoot people at that time. So soon after, and Soon after this, they organized a war party, and actually the old son, who became one of the two chiefs at the signing of Treaty Number 7, Chief Old Son, he had a son who was killed in this affair. And so 4 chiefs who had children who were killed in this affair went about the camps in mourning, and soon they gathered a huge following. So in the following months, they basically organized a huge combined war party of Siksikaitsitapiiks, and they went into the same particular area a little bit farther east, and they came upon two Cree camps that they pretty much wiped out. And after that, they came back, and the relationship between the Cree and the Blackfoot at that time became worse. And when I say Cree, this is what's in the records, but actually the truth is the Cree, it was the Iron Confederacy that they were referring to, because it wasn't just the Cree, there were actually Assiniboine, Soto, and other native camps that were all part of this group that came out, that were attacked and then were attacked again. So this happened in March 1866. Now we go to 1867. Now, in 1867, oops, sorry. Here we have the Fathers of Confederation. Now, what is Confederation? Well, basically, that's when Canada became Canada, Confederation of Canada. So in 1867, there are actually 4 provinces, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia, who all banded together and formed the country that we now know today as Canada. So we call this birth of this particular nation Confederation. So this happened in 1867. Now in 1867, what were the Blackfoot doing? Well, actually, let's see one of the fathers of Confederation, the first Prime Minister of Canada, Sir John A. Macdonald. And Crowfoot actually got a chance to meet with this person twice in private conversations, which is kind of weird because John A. Macdonald actually seemed to have a lot of respect for Crowfoot when they did meet. Now, this same year, the war records are actually the winter count, which is basically pictographs or symbols or drawings that are on a buffalo robe, which tell a story. And in some cases, the winter counts tell you what happened, the greatest significant event of that year, and then they'll have other events remembered because of that event. So these images were put on a story robe, and basically each image tells a story. So in this particular year, the South Piikani, they record that they were at war with the Crow, Groven, Flathead, and Assiniboine, all at the same time. So this would have been in the southern parts of our territory, along the mountains, the Yellowstone, and along the Missouri, and the eastern part of the Milk River. So they were actually pretty busy this particular year, Southern Piikani. Now Bull Plume, who was actually a Northern Piikani, his winter count records this year as when all the 5 tribes were at the same Ogan, which was a rare thing because apparently we'd be in different places and we'd have our own different Ogans. The Siksika would have one, the Agena would have one, Piikani would have one, at the very least. But in this particular year, they had one Ogan, and this Ogan was located here on the Bow River somewhere. Now, it could have been on the south camps or the north camps. It doesn't really say, but it says that the Ogan happened here, and all 5 tribes were there. So that was a rare event then. It also goes on to say that this was the same year when all the tribes last made the Biscun, and this was located near the present town of Gleason. Now this is interesting because if you're looking at Gleason, there's actually about 3 or 4 drums or pounds that we know of in this particular area. One of these places is up near the little village of Namaika, just north of Siksika, and this is a place we call Puxoxis, or as the white people call it, Hammer Hill. Well, this was a place that they used to drive the buffalo, ini, off of the cliffs. And that could have been where they set up this Bisgun, or it could have been right where the highway is on number 1 when you take the access road into the town of Gleason. There's a little area just to the northwest of there. And this area was known as a Bisgun, not so much as a buffalo jump, but as a place where you could corral the buffalo inside this natural coulee and keep them there and kill them at your leisure. So in any event, Bull Plume's winter count records this year as when all the tribes made the last Bisgun, last buffalo trap. And this was near the present town of Gleason. So if we move on, we can see the Okan picture. Well, that same winter count reads the Kainai. They have a winter count that reads that year they have plenty of furs and they make a big trade. So basically what that meant was that this time of year, this is when the Blackfoot began acquiring repeating rifles. So up until that time, you could rely on flukes and muskets sold by the Hudson Bay Company, by the British. But at this time, the Blackfoot started trading with the Americans. And a lot of these Americans, you got to understand, were disgruntled losers from the Civil War. A lot of these former Confederate soldiers came up north to ply their trade in Montana on the frontier. And these ones illegally began selling repeating rifles to the native tribes, particularly the Blackfoot. So in Fort Benton, places as such, the Blackfoot began acquiring repeating rifles, Henry rifles, Spencer rifles, Winchester. You can see in the pictures that all of these have the lever action there. Well, this is a big thing to the natives in this time, because up until that time, when you're holding a rifle, you fire one shot and then you have to put your powder in and your plug and you got to pack it down and get it all set for the next shot. Well, now you got cartridges. You can put them into your rifle there and you can put like 7 shells in that thing and you can fire 7 times. Now this was a great amount of firepower in those days, and the Blackfoot people were acquiring this from the American traders. So the result was more dried meat, robes, and leather. They were taken to the traders, which made them happy. And as long as buffalo were coming in, they kept on selling repeating rifles to the Blackfoot tribes. Now that was 1867. Now we come to 1868. Now just basically 1868 in the Canadian records, they record drought and crop failures in Canada, and also on those ones in the prairies, like on the Red River settlement places as such. These were experiencing crop failures. And also there's the tribes, and not just the tribes, but also the people from down east were starting to realize that the buffalo hunt was on a steep decline. There was harder to find the herds, the big herds, to keep the tribes fed enough that you could survive a winter. So they started to realize that the buffalo were disappearing in the eastern lands around this time, 1868. So at this time, this is an interesting note in the winter counts, all the tribes of the Siksikaitsitapiiks, meaning all the Blackfoot speaking peoples, were together again after many years, just as the year before. You remember that in 67, all the Blackfoot tribes are united after a long, long time. So the next year, they're still united. But this year, they're under the leadership of Many Horses, who was a blood chief. And so maybe because of his war record or his status in the ceremonies, he became the chief, like he was the head chief. If, let's say, Crowfoot was there, well, he would give authority to this man. Well, this man was moving to winter camps, and he was moving towards the Sweetgrass Hills from the Milk River, as you can see in the picture there. And he was with his wife, and her name was Lone Coop. Well, anyways, as they started going towards that area, they were discovered by the Groven, who were meaning to war with the Blackfoot. And so as they came upon these people, this man told the Grovens that he was the chief of a huge, huge camp that was coming in that area to set up winter camps. The Groven chief and his warriors didn't believe him. And so they ended up killing him and doing some bad things to them, as far as leaving their bodies behind. So it wasn't until just a little bit later, when they went to go look for their chief, that these Blackfoot scouts came across these Groven. And in the meantime, these Groven had allied themselves with a war party of Cree and with a war party of Crow. So there was a combined war party of Groven, Crow, and Crees that basically were set to attack the Blackfoot camps in that area. Well, there are a little bit of, some people would say, supernatural things that happened there, as far as writings that happened on writing on stone. But in any event, the Blackfoot tribes routed and they defeated the combined war party of Grovens, Crows, and Crees. And so this was a big event, and it was put down in most of the tribes' winter count records as this great victory over our southern enemy tribes. So also for 1868, it's recorded as the Bear People. Now these people were a clan, a family, and they were from the Bloods, Gaina family. But these people, before they had alcohol, they were given a lot of respect as warriors, as those people who would fight first. But when the alcohol, liquor came amongst our people, they were basically victims. They were addicts to the alcohol. So they got the reputation of being pretty violent people, these members of the Bear People band. So at one point in 1868, this band rushed through a Piikani camp in a drunken state, meaning they're all drunk, and they killed several people. This resulted in them being somewhat exiled from the other Blackfoot tribes, because simply they just couldn't trust them. Like when they were drinking, they were prone to violence, and they would sell everything they had just to get whiskey, a keg of whiskey. Even the rumor was that they robbed people. Well, this was fulfilled somewhat later in the years, but that's another story. But these people were somewhat feared, these Bear People. So also they have in the winter counts that many ghosts place. Now this was a place where the St. Mary's and I think the Belly River or Old Man River met. And 4 bears, I think they're referring to as Healy or Hamilton, 2 American traders. Well, this year it's recorded as there's a store that's actually selling goods to the native peoples in that particular area. So in 1868, we see that there's actually quite a lot going on amongst the tribes, as far as like even warfare. So we go to the next image. Well, we come across 1869. Now 1869 was a big year for not just Blackfoot, but for Canada. Now on March 20th, 1869, as you can see there in the picture, the Hudson's Bay Company reluctantly, under pressure from Great Britain, sold Rupert's Land to the government of Canada for $1.5 million. It says reluctantly there because they actually had some offers from the United States of America. The British were kind of afraid of the Americans in the sense of their manifest destiny as far as taking over lands and such. So they were thinking they would be looking at Rupert's Land. So they pressured the Hudson Bay Company to sell the land to the government of Canada. Now this happened in 1869. Now the sale involved roughly a quarter of a continent. As you see on the picture there, that's a huge piece of land that they felt entitled to. So it's a staggering amount of land, but it failed to take into account that there are already people living on these lands, including us, the Siksikaitsitapiiks, the Blackfoot, and the other tribes, the Cree and the Métis and such. Even all up into Quebec, the Cree and the Innu, they were all affected by this. And the thing is, none of our people even knew that this actually happened. The Crees kind of got a wind of it, and they were kind of wondering what was going to happen with their friends, the Hudson Bay Company, selling this to Canada. So it caused a lot of unrest when this actually happened. But for the most part, the Blackfoot were unaware that this deal actually took place. Now, as far as the government goes, in 1869, that's when we had enfranchisement. So an act for the gradual enfranchisement of Indians. And it defines an Indian as at least 1/4 First Nations blood And then it introduces a system, a 3-year elective for band leadership. And now this act also specified that women marrying outside of their bands would lose their status. And this is exactly kind of what started happening. Now those men who actually did well in schools and become part of the college or university, they would lose their rights. They would actually become part of Canada. Now you're a Canadian, you don't have to be a native anymore. So this is what enfranchisement was in 1869. This became part of the law of the land. Now this same year was actually Siksikaitsitapiiks, or in English his name was Broken Arm. Well, in 1869, because of the heavy fighting going on between the Blackfoot and the Cree, this man was known as a peacemaker. Now he would have come from the same time as the previous chiefs that died amongst the Blackfoot. Old Swan, Old Sun, 3 sons, well, Siksikaitsitapiiks, these people all knew each other. And the thing is, the 3 Blackfoot chiefs, as I mentioned, these are all peaceable, somewhat chiefs. Not to say that they weren't warlike or couldn't fight when they had to, but they were more peaceable to the traders and towards the mixed bloods. And so they were somewhat friends with this man, Siksikaitsitapiiks. So he would come on behalf of the Cree people to make peace with the Blackfoot people. Well, in 1869, he came with 14 of his people to make peace. And Siksikaitsitapiiks head chief, Big Swan, sort of tricked him and ended up wiping out their peace mission. And so this caused a lot of bad feelings, particularly amongst the Cree tribes there, when this happened, when Siksikaitsitapiiks was killed. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as it comes, because, well, actually, let's talk about it now. Well, when Siksikaitsitapiiks was killed, a lot of other Cree chiefs, all the way to the Qu'Appelle Valley and Touchwood Hills, and Assiniboine chiefs, and they got together and formed a huge war party, and they were waiting for the opportunity to attack the Blackfoot tribes and wreak havoc. So in 1869, as we see here too, American trader John J. Healy, he gets permission from Gainawa head chief Many Spotted Horses. Now people should know that, because where this Fort Whoop-Up was located was actually on the hunting grounds of that Gainawa head chief, Many Spotted Horses. And he asked his permission, and that first year he came out just basically selling out of his wagon with just a little bit of a outpost. And when he left, that was actually burnt down to the ground. It was destroyed. When he came back the previous year, he hired a man named Gladstone. And Gladstone, being the architect, built this Fort Whoop-Up, this rendering of Fort Whoop-Up. Now this Fort Whoop-Up was located at the confluence, basically meaning where the Belly River and the St. Mary's River meets. And in that particular area, this is where he built his trading post. Now this was in 1869, in the autumn of 1869. Now, if we move to the next image, another event hit our people. Now in the autumn of 1869, originating from the Missouri riverboat in particular, one of their steamboats, smallpox broke out amongst the Blackfoot people. And this smallpox epidemic basically took out 1/3 of the Blackfoot-speaking peoples at that time. So that's basically looking at 1/3 of your family disappear. And so at this time, because of the smallpox epidemic, a lot of our enemies at that time thought that the smallpox had struck such a devastating blow to the Blackfoot people that they can come in and basically, with one huge assault, wipe out the Blackfoot peoples, or wipe out their power anyway. So in this same time of year, December in 1869, the Métis resistance led by Louis Riel took control of the Red River establishment, and they established provisional Métis-led government. So you could see here that provisional government that Louis Riel formed with the other Red River people there. And this group of people here basically rebelled against Canadian rule. And so This was the start of it. Then the following year, they left. Most of them left to the United States because they were outlawed, including Louis Riel. So if we go to 1870, well, in 1870, we have the smallpox, and it's still ravaging the Blackfoot tribes. Throughout this year, as I mentioned, huge amounts of our people passed away. And so even our head chiefs, like seen from afar, who was a great blood head chief, he died in that year because of the smallpox. And the other blood chief, Bullbreast, he also died from this disease. Amongst the Siksika, Chief Three Sons, he died. So his followers in the Biters band, they joined Crowfoot's Big Pipes band. And when this happened, Crowfoot becomes one of 3 head chiefs of the Siksika. Old Sun and Big Swan are the other 2. And Crowfoot's band becomes known as the Moccasin Band. Now at the same time too, like we don't talk about it much, but you know, Crowfoot did have family and he was personally affected by this particular disease. It didn't affect him. He escaped the disease twice. The second one in 1836 and the third one in 1870. But Crowfoot survived, he survived both of these epidemics. But unfortunately, many of his children and his wives didn't. So a lot of these ones passed away during this particular epidemic. So these losses would have been heavy on the mind and heart of Crowfoot and the other leaders just before the signing of Treaty Number 7. And so in 1870, what ends up happening is, as you can see in this picture, now the Siksikaitsitapiiks are basically the Siksikaitsitapiiks. They defeat the Iron Confederacy War Party at the Battle of Belly River. Now this happened where present-day Lethbridge is. There's a place called the Indian Battle Park, and it's kind of has storyboards and such. If you ever get a chance, go out there and take a look at it. But this area here is actually where the actual battle happened, last battle that happened between the Cree and the Blackfoot. And when I say the Cree, as I mentioned earlier, it wasn't just the Cree, there was other people, the Assiniboine and Soto, who were part of this huge war party that came out of the Qu'Appelle Valley, Touchwood Hills. Now, as I mentioned, the 1869-70 smallpox epidemic that happened earlier that year wiped out a third of the Blackfoot-speaking peoples. Now, at this time, the news reached the east, and a lot of the enemy tribes there realized that the Blackfoot are in extremely weakened condition because of this disease. And also, you have to understand, this is the start of the whiskey trade. So the whiskey is starting to weaken in our people as well, because there's a lot of disunity on account of no respect happening between peoples at this time. So all of what ends up happening is earlier this year, and we didn't put it here because it was the United States, but I think this is important. Earlier in 1870, I believe, the Blackfoot camp under Heavy Runner was attacked by the U.S. Cavalry and Army under Eugene M. Baker of the United States military. And these people rolled up on a peaceful camp, Heavy Runner's camp. Now, Heavy Runner was looking after a sick camp. All the people in his camp had smallpox. So he was looking after these people, excuse me, when the military rolled up on him. And as they came up, he came out there with a piece of paper basically saying that we're at peace with the United States of America. And Eugene M. Baker, he was looking for Mountain Chief. And he was led to Heavy Runner, and his troops attacked. And at the end of that, they basically killed 173 Blackfoot, or so the records say. And the majority of those were women and children. They figured the numbers were like 90 women and 60 children, and the rest were men, and most of them older men. Now, as I mentioned, this was a sick camp, but these people were basically wiped out. The healthy men, the healthy members of the family, and the hunters were all away. The warriors were all away from that camp, hunting for that camp when these soldiers rolled up. And when they came back, they found their dead loved ones. Well, this didn't just worry the Piikani. This worried the entire Blackfoot Confederacy. So because of this, all the Blackfoot tribes basically moved north into the Belly River and Waterton River, and all of this area where present day the Blood Reserve is, the Gaina. reserve. Well, in this area here, this is where most of the camps were stretched out along those rivers because of what the Americans had done to us earlier in 1870. Well, for this reason, when the Cree decided to attack the Blackfoot camps with a huge war party. Now, the numbers of this war party differ. Some people say close to 1,000, or it could have been as maybe 600. So 600 people to 1,000-man war party descended on the Blackfoot, camped on the Old Man River. Now, their scouts had saw a little camp of 11 lodges, and they failed to look farther west. So as they came upon this little camp, which was by the way, Mountain Chief's camp, they attacked it. And in this initial attack, they killed about 40 people. But before they could do any more damage, the rest of the tribes along the river heard of what was happening there. And then, as you heard earlier, from 1867 onward, the Blackfoot were acquiring repeating rifles. So when they joined the battle, and when the day broke, and both sides could see each other, then the Blackfoot realized how huge this war party was that was attacking them. It could have been, as I mentioned, anywhere from 600 to 1,000 men. And then at that same time, the invading enemy tribe realized how many Blackfoot there were. They realized that there were Blackfoot camps all up and down these rivers leading to that one particular place. And then they also realized that there was thousands or hundreds of warriors coming out from the camps on horseback. So they realized that that was a big problem. So they end up having an initial kind of a confrontation, and then the Cree end up running across a tableland 4 miles until they came to a coulee where they tried to hold off the Blackfoot. And then if you look at the battle records, Jerry Potts has an account of the battle. And if you read Paul Raska's Winter Count book, there's a lot of accounts of this battle coming from both sides of the battle. Well, basically at the end of this battle, the Siksikaitsitapiiks basically wiped out this whole war party. Now, in our stories say that only 10 survivors went back home. I don't know how true that is or not, but for the most part, this war party was wiped out. They recovered up to about 170 to 200 bodies on the surface, but the majority of the enemy were killed in the water as they were trying to cross the Belly River. So there was an uncounted number that were never recovered that floated downstream. Well, this was the great last big battle between the Blackfoot tribes and the Iron Confederacy tribes. And this happened in 1870. Now, if you move to the next image, you can see the trading posts. Now, these trading posts started to spring up after John J. Healy and Alfred Hamilton built the original Fort Whoop-Up. It became a center of trade for not just the native peoples living in the area, but for more Americans from Fort Benton to come into an area, a safe place where they can camp and stay. And so a lot of trade developed through here. And then these traders actually started to go farther afield. And in future presentations, we'll show you these different maps where the different whiskey posts were coming from the Americans. But it's basically these people who brought in the whiskey trade. Our Blackfoot people were bringing in robes, pemmican, buffalo robes, pemmican, and horses. And these were our main items of trade, And we would get regular trade goods at these posts, blankets, tools, hatchets, etc., things like this. But for the most part, it was for whiskey. And the whiskey that these places sold were what they called firewater. It wasn't liquor that they would sell to their own people. It was watered down alcohol mixed with bitters, tobacco, bitters, laudanum, drugs, all sorts of different things they would throw into these firewater, and they would sell these by the keg to the Blackfoot people in exchange for horses, robes, and such. So these pictures this is just a picture of these type of trading places or whiskey posts that sprung up all over southern Alberta after Hamilton and Healy formed the Fort Whoop-Up. Now we kind of go to 1871. Okay, so going to 1871. Well, this is actually the start of the first treaties. Now in 1871, Treaty 1, the Stone Fort Treaty, present-day Winnipeg area, with the Saulteaux, Ojibwa, Mushkegowuk, and others in southern Manitoba. So that was Treaty number 1. Treaty number 2 was the Manitoba Post Treaty with the Saulteaux, Ojibwa, Anishinaabe, Aski, and Cree peoples in central Manitoba. Well, at this same time, British Columbia joins Confederation, and it retains control of its crown land. So basically, the crown lands were in the hands of the British Columbia government. But at this time in 1871, British Columbia joins Confederation. Now, at this time too, British Columbia is way on this side in the west, and then right across the entire continent to the other side is the rest of Canada, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. And so they wanted the dream of nation united from sea to shining sea. So at this point, that hadn't happened yet. So during this time also, it's recorded in the winter counts that white men settle on the High River. So in our language, we called the high wood Spitsi because of the tall trees that grew along it. In translation, they translated it to High River. So on this particular High River, which was within the Blackfoot, the Blood, particularly the Gaina, their hunting grounds, we would have known when people moved into the area. And so on our winter counts for 1871, it's actually written, white men settle on the High River. They start building their smaller trade posts, which over the years end up becoming a bigger trade and a center of trade for the American whiskey traders and wolfers. Well, at this time in 1871, in the winter count records, it says this is the time that we built old biscuns near the Blackfoot Crossing. So you can see this area, Blackfoot Crossing, where our interpretive center is located, this entire area was constantly being traveled through. And so from history, we know that, and also we know that from the archaeological evidence left behind at the sites here at the Blackfoot Crossing, that this was an area of high traffic. A lot of people passed through here. And this area was filled with buffalo traps, as I mentioned earlier, all over the Blackfoot Crossing area. So in the winter counts, it actually says in 1871, the Blackfoot tribes came over here and we built old biscuns, rebuilt them, near the Blackfoot Crossing. So we kind of go on to 1872. Actually, I think that's where the program ends today, with 71. From next week's program, we're going to try and bring you up to date up into 71 to the time of the signing of the treaty. But I think for today, we're going to stop here at 1871. So I'm going to kind of leave it open here at this point for the rest of the program. If there's any questions from anybody out there in the audience, is there anything, any kind of question you may have regarding anything we talked about today? Okay. Well, with that, I think we'll say Gata Matsin, be safe, and please tune in next week because we will have a lot more information to share with you. So from Grand Many Heads, from Blackfoot Crossing Historical Park, I want to thank you for attending in today, and have a good week. Gata Matsin.